Human trafficking is modern-day slavery that involves some kind of force, fraud, or coercion.
There are three kinds of child labor: sexual, bonded labor, and child soldiers.
It's managed behind the scenes, and victims aren't chosen by race, but by their vulnerability.
Human trafficking is a criminal industry that takes advantage of children who are vulnerable to exploitation. They are trained to produce a high amount of goods and are paid a meager amount, if at all. Each year, 800 to 900,000 human beings are being bought, sold, or forced across the world's borders. And over 150 countries function as a source, destination, or transit country for slave trade.
Victims often develop Stockholm Syndrome, in which they develop positive feelings for their captors. It's a survival instinct that helps them cope with captivity, but it only makes it harder for them to escape. The system thrives with high profit and demand, and left unchecked, it has had the ability to flourish.
A lot of times it begins with just abject poverty and the fact that there's not a lot of opportunities for families to either educate their child or have hope that their child is going to get out of a particular situation. And so sadly, businesses that use forced labor prey upon children in those situations and families in those situations. And there's a lot of untruth told about ways in which they're going to bring a better life for their child.
Oh, okay.
So either based on kidnapping or communicating not the full truth to the parents, are children then taken into forced labor situations. And oftentimes it is sort of what our mind goes to when we think of slavery. You know, not sleeping well, not eating well, not being able to do anything that kids normally would do, like play and have fun and those kinds of things. And then oftentimes, depending on the particular field that they're going into, certain ages of kids are more desired because their fingers are smaller. So, well, there definitely is human rights laws, not nationally, but globally, where this is not acceptable. Most governments have an idea that these things are happening, but because it's very difficult to exactly sort of catch someone in the circumstance of it, and because, to be honest, a lot of the governments are benefiting. There are several agencies that actually work to help free slaves. Free the Slaves is one of them. Free the Children is another. There's also the Restavik Foundation, and they normally focus on regions of the world. Then there's also Purchasing Fair Trade.
Fair trade is the solution, or one of the solutions, to human trafficking of all kinds, particularly child labor. 10,000 Villages is one fair trade provider. There are many. There's coffee and chocolate and others as well. And right now, the consumer can look for the labels. Anyone who has been trafficked is part of an economic system where their basic needs have not been met. And so therefore, parents sell their children sometimes. Young people, especially girls, are vulnerable to the good story. You know, be a nanny in the United States, or whatever it is. It's heartbreaking, because those children should be able to be kids and should be able to be in school. But if their parents aren't making enough to feed them, and they're hungry, which of course they're going to be, then other stuff's going to happen. And unfortunately, in our world, there's business people who are going to take advantage of that. Fair trade says no, it's not all right. It's not all right that kids are working, and it's not all right that adults are working as a little better than slaves. In some cases, they are slaves. That isn't right, and we would rather not buy the product at all than contribute to that kind of inhumane treatment. So it's a human rights issue. It's a moral issue. And fair trade at least lets us as consumers know that there's an option. I like fair trade because it's about real people. I can look at items in my house. I can look at the lovely jewelry that I wear, things like that, and I can know that a real Indian woman made this, and she was able to feed her kids and send her daughter to school. I get a nice piece of jewelry, but there's a woman out there for whom this really mattered, more than I'll ever know. And I like being part of that instead of part of the exploitation.
I think just creating more awareness and then also going the extra mile to purchase fair trade.
When you have discretionary money, when you're going to buy a gift for someone, when you're going to buy something chocolate, when you're going to buy coffee or tea, which probably you could live without. In some world, you could live without those things. But when that's on your list to buy, think fair trade. Come to 10,000 Villages, look around, get online. There's lots of fair trade vendors out there. And pay a little more, a tiny bit more for coffee, a little bit more for chocolate, and contribute to the solution. Coffee is definitely one of those things that could be fair trade. Like, that would be the norm, and then there would be like some other stuff that isn't. But consumers have to demand it. Something that's labeled fair trade might be a lie, but whoever it is that's labeling it that way is at least aware of the fact that people in the world need to be paid fairly.
Okay.
Compared to the other products, which are just products, you definitely know that people didn't get a living wage.
The other thing that I think would be really neat in terms of a lot of the clothing lines is challenging different places that are now very popular for people to have stylish clothes, to challenge the managers of those particular department stores and businesses to look more into where their clothing is being made.
It will be better for all of us, like everyone on the planet, if we American consumers understood more where our stuff comes from.
The amount of people that are subject to this now are many, many, many times over the amount that were during the transatlantic slave trade. And I think so often in history we look back on that as just such a terrible time. So I'm really glad you all are doing this, because I think what is important is to realize that we're going to look back on this too and realize that we should have probably done more.